let's talk real quick, Bryce. I know you were firing away today when you saw some guys getting either DFA'd to create room for other players to be added, or also saw some other players that weren't protected in the were added to roster, so they're not protected. Reds potential could select them in the Rule 5 draft. Who are some of your top names that you're like, ooh, I like the Reds to get their hands on those guys?
Yeah, there's a couple. I think George Valera is a big one. He was DFA'd in Cleveland. A guy that was a former top 20 prospect in all of baseball. Cleveland fans love him. I think they're really disappointed that he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. I think even towards the end of the year, I think he had another injury that is going to put him out another 6 months towards the end of the start of spring training, that area. So I feel for him because the talent's incredible. He hit the ball as hard as anybody. He doesn't chase. He doesn't really strike out. He walks a lot, plays good outfield. So I think he's a guy that you almost have to take a chance on, even if he's on your kind of like injury reserve or whatever for a while, to really kind of get right. Because if he does get healthy here, and we all know that ACLs aren't the end all be all for baseball players. Like, people can bounce back or they can be fine after these things. So he's a guy that I feel like would be a really good guy to take a chance on. Honestly, he would be like the fourth or fifth outfielder for me in the entire Reds organization. So he's definitely a very intriguing guy there. Isaiah Campbell is another one. He was DFA'd in Boston. He was I think he was a second-round pick, maybe a first-round pick for Seattle in 2019. Has really pitched well in like his entire career. He never had an ERA below 3.5 throughout his entire minor league career. He didn't really pitch a ton, but he got to Seattle last year, pitched really well, was traded to Boston, and kind of struggled a little bit. He pitched well in AAA, but the stuff is incredible. He had a 141 stuff plus. To put that in perspective, that is like Lucas Sims, TJ Antone prime level, like guys that just outstuff you, and he has that level there. So I don't know why the Boston DFA'd him, given their bullpen struggles, but he's a guy I would definitely take a chance on. He would jump like Legumina, even Lyon Richardson there as guys to prioritize there. And then two other names. The Mets didn't protect two starting pitchers, Dominic Campbell and Mike Vassell. Both, you're going to think I'm crazy if you just go look at the numbers, because they had really ugly numbers, but Syracuse is a really brutal park to pitch in. Both guys have 5-6 pitches that they kind of work within. Hamill, before this year, was a highly coveted prospect. Mets fans love him. They're really disappointed they didn't protect both of those guys. So those are guys that I think are potential Rule 5 pickups that the Reds could kind of stash in like a long man type position, because both those guys are major league ready and can get outs in the big leagues right now.
A couple guys in inner division that I saw that were DFA that I'm curious your thoughts on. We'll start off with the Cubs. Brendan Davis was a pretty highly rated prospect, kind of has struggled when he's got to the upper levels. The Cubs also, Adbert Alzolay. Now, he's out all year because of Tommy John surgery, but was the closer. Do you have any interest in stashing Alzolay or any interest in Davis?
Not really Adbert. I think that he's maybe a project for somebody. I don't know if that's really up the Reds' alley. He's not really a stuff guy. He's more of like a command type reliever, which the Reds usually aren't super interested in. He did have a great year last year in 2023. He really pitched really well for the Cubs. So, but Brendan Davis is honestly pretty similar to Valera. He's not as talented as Valera, in my opinion, but he does have that tantalizing upside that you kind of look for. He dealt with a ton of injuries. So definitely a guy I would be interested in if potentially the Reds can scoop him up there.
Yeah, and Alzolay, of course, you'd have to keep him on your roster as one of your 40 all offseason. Mm-hmm. Once you get to, at some point in spring training, you can put him on the 60-day IL, but you have to kind of try to figure it out until then. It's going to be hard for the Reds. It feels like roster spots for the Reds on that 40-man roster are going to be really hard this offseason. George Valera, I'm with you. That's a guy that I would love for the Reds to get. I have a feeling because he was DFA'd, probably not going to get to the Reds in waivers. I think someone else that's more, in a rebuilding stage is probably going to take a shot on him. But certainly interesting nonetheless. Saw Drew Rom. I know he was part of the return for one of their big trades from the Orioles, I believe. Hasn't had great numbers, but kind of an interesting arm that could give you some length and stuff. And then the Pittsburgh Pirates didn't add anyone to their 40-man roster. That was pretty surprising. There was a couple of the Blue Jays too. It's wild. The Reds always add several players. It's pretty wild. There are teams that don't add anyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really bad sign for your farm system if you're not adding anybody, because that's just a free 40-man spot with 3 options usually. Even if the guy has some flaws, like they're going to go to the minor leagues and they have 3 options. So I just don't. You really are. There's a lot of times you can just add somebody too, and you can DFA them later in the offseason or whatever. So that's really shocking that I saw multiple teams didn't add people. So that is pretty crazy.
We also want to remind you that you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health. Whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between, it's a 100% confidential, secure, and anonymous way to reach out for help when you don't know where else to turn. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It's okay not to be okay.